Chapter 1. The Tradition. This video is created and distributed with the permission of the Kabbalah Society, who are the sole copyright holder of this book. Please subscribe to be notified of when more chapters and books come out on this channel. In every religion, there are always two aspects, the seen and the hidden. The manifest is observed in buildings, ministers, rituals, and scriptures. These perform the task of influencing the world at large by bringing a sense of higher power, a moral code, and good customs into what, for the mass of people, is a tooth and claw existence. Of course, there are times when the ministry becomes influenced by the ways of the world and its authority is corrupted, turning it into the oppressor of the soul as well as the body. But such phenomena are subject to the laws of cosmic justice, and the evil destroys itself. Every religion has had such periods, and they indicate the last phase of decay, before a new impulse enlivens the tradition again. The new impulse always originates from the hidden aspect of the religion. Often centered on one man or a group, the light that once illuminated the teaching returns to meet the needs of a generation that can no longer accept its parents' understanding of the tradition. This process must occur continuously in order to preserve the life of a religion. When it does not, the inner meaning soon fades away into mere form, which then turns into dead custom that imprisons the ignorant and drives the intelligent away. The irony and providence of such a situation is that the rebels often seek and find the original principles of their faith far away from the conventional and conservative establishment of their own religion. Indeed, often while examining the source of another tradition, they recognize the same precepts and objectives, and sometimes in terms strangely more familiar than the watered-down or silted-up versions in which they were instructed as children. This is because, at source, all traditions meet. This source is the hidden aspect of the tradition that periodically manifests when those responsible for the spiritual life of mankind reformulate the teaching for the current generation. This restatement of the nature of man and his relationship to the world and God takes many forms, but it is never changed in essence. The teaching is complete and perfect, although it wears many garments. The hidden aspect of religion is to preserve the tradition, but not by rigid code. Thus, while the teaching is written down or designed into festival art or story, its real life can only be imparted orally, that is, in a subtle relationship between elder and younger. In this way, there is no distortion as the language of the past becomes blurred with time. Each generation is taught in its own tongue, so that while terms may change, the precise meaning in a current idiom does not. This is why many scriptures of long ago are unintelligible. We sense the profound truth of them, but we cannot fully comprehend the language or symbols because they were written for the children of that time. This does not mean that all writings are invalid. There are some, like the Bible, that are so simple and objective that the teaching speaks across the millennia. The stories are basic, with no technical complexity. For example, we can see, in the journey of the children of Israel out of Egypt and to the Promised Land, the travail of the soul leaving the bondage of the body, and its difficulties before entering the land flowing with milk and honey. Such scriptures are of quite a different order to the many learned works and textbooks of religion. Every religion has its scriptures, and they are the grounding of that tradition in relation to the world at large. None of the major faiths could exist without them. The inner tradition is a continuous line. Kabbalah, it is said, goes back to the angels who were instructed by God. Mankind is taught by the chief archangel Metatron who, apocalyptic legend says, is the transfigured Enoch, the man who walked with God and did not taste death. Genesis 5:24. Metatron, legend says, has manifested throughout history as various great teachers, one of whom may have been Melchizedek, the king without father or mother, who initiated Abraham into the line. Genesis 14:18-20. Abraham in turn taught his son Isaac, who passed the teaching on to Jacob. When Jacob became Israel, the father of the 12 types of all humanity, only Levi was capable of transmitting the teaching. Moses, a Levite, continued the line, passing it on to Joshua and the elders of Israel. David, the first real king of Israel, had a direct connection with the tradition, as his blessing of Solomon indicates in his use of the attributes of God. 1 Chronicles 29:11. Solomon possessed the key, but lost it when he drifted off into the worship of other gods. This caused the ending of the kingdom and the eventual destruction of the temple, which symbolized and embodied the teaching in its architecture. With the outer manifestation gone, the teaching went underground during the exile to Babylon, but returned again with the great assembly of Ezra. From here on, it ran parallel to Orthodox Judaism, but always discreetly hidden, so that, while the learned studied the Bible and its commentary, which became the Talmud, there were also those who contemplated and practiced the Maser Bereshit, the work of creation or study of the universe, and the Maser Merkabah, the work of the chariot or study of man. Both these studies were considered highly secret, and yet, as with all esoteric doctrines, they remain concealed not because anyone hid them, but because they were simply unintelligible to anyone who had no interest in the upper worlds. Like all such studies, much misunderstanding grew around them, sometimes because those who thought they knew imagined they had an exclusive right to the knowledge and frightened inquirers away as intruders, or because of sheer superstitious ignorance, especially those who understood only a little of the implication of spiritual work. This phenomenon has dogged mystics in every religion. St. John of the Cross was hard-pressed by the Church, and not a few Sufis were persecuted by Orthodox Islam. Mystics within Judaism had the same problem, and some, like the Essenes, formed isolated communities to protect themselves. Figure 5. Initiation. Here Abraham is given the bread and wine of esoteric theory and practice by Melchizedek on the site of the future Jerusalem. Melchizedek is a manifestation of Enoch, the first fully realized human being, who can traverse time and space. From this point on, Abram is called Abraham, the father of many people. This means various schools of the soul. He passed on the knowledge to his descendants. In time, this became the possession of the priesthood, the judges, and then the prophets. Later, the tradition was carried out by the rabbis and, in the Middle Ages, the Jewish mystics. This continues to this day. Picture shown is a medieval enamel. The Kabbalah, although it was not called this until the Middle Ages, was present both in Palestine and the Babylonian community throughout the Roman period. By this time, it had absorbed many Greek and Babylonian words and ideas, adapting them to the Jewish mystical tradition in order to speak to the generations who lived within the cultures of these empires. Such books as the Sefer Yetzirah illustrate the blend well, and other works, like the Book of Enoch, indicate the prophetic revelation was far from dead despite the powerful Gentile flavour of the text. The line continued through the early Christian era, and there is no doubt that Joshua ben Miriam, or Jesus, was well acquainted with hidden Jewish tradition. His whole outlook and frame of reference is Kabbalistic. Thus, for example, his term Kingdom of Heaven directly refers to the Malkut of Berea. On the Orthodox front, the work of the chariot was continued, the Talmud calling its practitioners the Merkabah travellers, or the frequenters of paradise. This period created a literature based on their experiences. Such spiritual excursions to the various stages of ascension were described in terms of heaven, halls, the throne of God, and in one work, a description of the divine Adam and his dimensions. These books were regarded by those in charge of mainstream Judaism as too potent for ordinary folk to handle. Indeed, many rabbis forbade their study and insisted on concentrating only on the reason logic of the literal Torah, which dealt principally with righteous conduct in this world. Figure 6. Ezekiel. This mystic from a priestly family had a vision of the higher worlds while sitting by a canal in Babylonia. He described his experience symbolically, as it is the only way to present the indescribable. Such an image contains religious and philosophical knowledge for those who can see beyond the literal. The level of the earth is quite obvious, but the form of the chariot signifies the celestial cycles within a cosmic framework, watched over by the angels responsible for such rhythms. This theme represents the heavenly realm of the spirit, with the fiery man as the image of God. The scheme is an allegorical picture of the four worlds of matter, formation, creation, and divine emanation. This image is from Bear's Bible, 16th century. The Chokmah Nistara, the hidden wisdom, remained concealed by its very nature and continued on as the discrete practice of a few over many centuries until it was transmitted to Italy by Aaron ben Samuel from Babylon in the middle of the 9th century. From here it spread north into Germany to give rise to a very practically orientated Kabbalah, and west to France and Spain to generate the more speculative branch. This philosophical trend in the Western Mediterranean was stimulated by the revival of Greek learning in Muslim Spain. To counteract the attraction of Aristotle, Kabbalists reformulated the teaching into the acceptable academic language of the time. As Kabbalah already contained many Neoplatonic terms, the adaptation was successful. Indeed, so much so that there was a major flowering of Kabbalism parallel to the great movement of scholasticism in Christendom. The geographical focus of Kabbalistic study lay in Provence and Spain, particularly the Catalan town of Girona, where much important speculative work was done on Kabbalistic theory. Out of this great surfacing of the tradition came what is generally recognized as Kabbalah. It was crystallized into a massive literary work known as the Zohar, or Book of Splendor, which contains a vast amount of esoteric material dating back to Roman times. As such, despite the fact that it was considered at best a compilation and at worst a brilliant forgery by its author Moses de Leon, it became the authoritative canon for written Kabbalah. Orally, the teaching remained discreet, although each generation spoke of it and wrote it down in terms that it could understand. Isaac Luria, a Kabbalist who lived in the 16th century Palestine, was the last major reinterpreter of the tradition. While none of his writing survives, his influence in the speculative field and in practice is still with us today, although in fragmented form. The line still continues after passing through many events in Jewish history, some of them as catastrophic to the tradition as to the people involved in them. The 17th century false messiah Shabbatai Tzvi shook the image of Kabbalah into discredit for several centuries, and the borrowing of its terms and diagrams by aspiring magicians for very unkabbalistic purposes brought its name into much disrepute. The magical use of Kabbalah had already happened amongst Jews during bad periods of persecution, but this occurs in all peoples when under extreme duress. The line in its pure form did, however, proceed despite these difficulties, and manifested among the Hasidim of Eastern Europe and the Oriental Jews who had picked it up from the Sephardi or Spanish and Portuguese exiles of the 15th century who had spread out over Europe, North Africa, and the Turkish Empire. All formulations of a tradition are initiated, grow, fulfill their purpose, decay, and die. Often, however, many who are on the periphery of such a movement do not recognize that the light has been removed, that the heart has gone from the formulation, and that all that is left is a set of redundant rules. The unperceptive often mimic the master, even don his role, and teach without depth and without realization of the precepts. They perform by rote because they have never experienced the teaching, nor can they without a major change in their being. History reveals many such spiritual bodies that have died and become the precise reverse of what their founders conceived them to be. Schools, originally designed to help people to free themselves spiritually, can become psychological prisons. Such a training situation is dangerous for the seeker in pursuit of truth or mystical experience. To have as a master a man who is simply aping his own teacher, or worse, living out a long-dead myth, is useless. In such a case, help can come to a genuine aspirant, but not through the authority of a formal dynasty. Contact with the hidden tradition can be direct and unmistakable. This is the untraceable line of connection that scholars never find. It is the truly oral tradition. The result may be spectacular, like Ezekiel's vision by the River Khyber, but it is more likely to be an apparently well-arranged happening, a psychological change of attitude or an encounter that will alter the course of a whole life. All that is required for such an event is a total commitment to spiritual growth. With this prerequisite, grace and providence can set up the conditions for an inner and outer change. Such turning points are very rare, but then people who are prepared to risk all for a pearl of great price are not common. In time, and always just at the right moment, a teacher or Maggid arrives. He may manifest in many ways, as old Kabbalistic documents indicate. One may not see him more than once, or realize one has known him all his life. It can be one's grandfather, or a fellow student, the man crossing the sea with you on a boat, or someone you thought a fool. He may arrive at your front door, or already be in the house. No one can know who your Maggid is, except you and he. Kabbalah can only be imparted face to face. It is an oral tradition which, while being given and received in the idiom of today, is a continuous conversation that has been carried on over many centuries. The purpose of this book is to show the steps up Jacob's ladder. It sets out the theory and practice of the tradition in ancient and modern terms, so that the sense of what Kabbalah is about may be grasped. For no book can ever convey the reality of the tradition unless it is present already in the reader. For my part, I continue the work my fathers gave me. I write in order to pay my debt, impart what I know, because, as one Kabbalistic maxim states, one cannot receive unless one bestows. In this way, the line continues until even our familiar world becomes quaint, old, then ancient to future generations. Then there will be, no doubt, others who will pick up the tradition, be it by instruction or illumination. Perhaps you are the person, someone who reads these words in a faded book by a long-dead Kabbalist whose archaic phrases make some sense in a modern world far into my future. In Kabbalah, time does not matter. Only eternity and beyond is our concern. Figure 7. Higher Worlds. Here, the Tree of Knowledge is set in the midst of the Garden of Eden. It represents the world of creation within paradise, the world of formation. Above is the Tree of Life, which symbolizes the divine realm of the Sephriot, sometimes called the Holy Apples. It is beyond Adam and Eve, despite the temptation of Lucifer in the form of the serpent Satan, which means the tester. Higher knowledge cannot be acquired by humanity until it has descended to the lower world of action, where the experience through incarnation takes them up the central path of evolution into heaven and the divine. The image is of a medieval woodcut.